The first shell came down on the Mint at 9:15, and the whole city held its breath the way a man does when a blade goes in before the pain. I was crossing the forecourt of the king's house when it struck, my boots loud on the frosted flagstones, the lantern in my hand throwing my shadow long and thin against the gate. The sound did not arrive the way thunder does, rolling and announcing itself. It simply happened, a flat, enormous clap that came up through the soles of my feet before it reached my ears, and then a second behind it, the air itself shoved sideways so that I staggered and the lantern flame jumped. Across the river, where the great copper roof of the Mint had stood since the old kings, a column of orange light rose into the dark, and the bells of the lower town began to ring on their own, not pulled by any hand, but shaken loose by the blow. We had known it would come. For 3 days the wireless had carried nothing but the same gray voices saying the same gray things, that the line at Velen Ford had not held, that the enemy guns of the Marsh coalition had been hauled within range of the capital, that the city of Carthage, which had not heard a hostile cannon in 200 years, would now hear them at last. We had known. Knowing is not the same as the sound. When the sound came, every man on the wall went still, and I, who am not ashamed to say it, felt my own heart climb up into my throat and sit there, beating. I am Corwin Aldous, and at that hour I was a trooper of the King's House Guard, 3 winters at the gate, and I tell you this so you understand that what I am about to set down I saw with my own eyes from a distance of perhaps 40 feet, the whole of that long night through. I did not read it in a paper. I did not hear it from another man and dress it up. I stood close enough to hear him breathing. Him, Trooper Edrin Vance of the same watch as me, posted that night at the westmost sentry box of the great iron gate, the box nearest the river, the box nearest the guns. When the second shell fell, the corporal of the relief came running across the court with his coat half on, shouting for us to fall back into the undercroft, the deep stone cellars beneath the king's house where the household had already been sent. It was the order any sane man wanted to hear. 40 feet of open gravel and then a stair down into solid rock, with 3 feet of old stone between you and the sky. The whole watch began to move toward it, and I with them, my boots already turning. And then I looked back, the way you look back at a fire you are leaving, and I saw that Edrin Vance had not moved at all. He stood in his box at the slope of the gate, his rifle at the present, his bearskin black against the burning river, his white gloves bright in the lantern fall, and he was looking straight ahead down the King's Road as if it were any ordinary night, and the only thing in the world were the doing of his duty exactly and well. "Vance," the corporal bawled, "fall in the undercroft now." And Edrin Vance said, in a voice I can hear yet, a voice with no fear in it and no defiance either, only fact, "The gate is not relieved, corporal. I have the post until I am relieved." The corporal stopped dead, so did I. For there is a thing in the guard older than any of us, older than the war, older than the men who made the war, a thing that says the post is held until the next man takes it, and a sentry does not leave his post for weather, for crowds, for fear, or for fire. We all knew it. We had all said the words on the day they swore us in, our right hands raised in the cold chapel, "I will keep my post until I am relieved." We said it the way men say things they do not expect to be tested on. We said it the way you sign a paper you have not read. Edrin Vance had read it. The third shell came down then, closer, in the customs quarter not half a mile off, and a hot wind came over the wall carrying grit and the smell of burning tar, and the corporal flinched and threw up his arm. When he lowered it, Vance was exactly where he had been. Not a button moved, not a glove. The wind had pushed the lantern flame flat and set the gate's iron groaning on its hinges, and the man under the bearskin had taken it the way the gate itself took it, by standing. "You'll be relieved," the corporal said, and his voice had changed. It had gone quiet, almost pleading. "I'll send your relief the moment the bombardment lifts. No one will hold it against you, lad. There's no shame in the cellar tonight. The king himself is in the cellar tonight." "Then the king's gate must be kept," said Vance, "the more and not the less." I do not think the corporal had an answer to that. I know I did not. He looked at Vance a long moment, and then he looked at me, and something passed over his hard face that I had never seen on it before, a kind of helplessness, as if he had given an order to the weather. Then he turned and ran the rest of us down into the dark of the undercroft, and the last thing I saw as the stone door swung was Edrin Vance, alone at the gate, framed in the light of a city beginning to burn. I want to be honest about what I felt in that cellar, because if I pretend I was brave, you will not believe the rest. I was not brave. I sat with my back against 3 feet of stone and my knees drawn up, and I listened to the shells walk across Carthage. A near one, a far one, a near one, and I counted them like a child counts to keep from crying. And each time one landed close, I thought of the man up there in the open with nothing over his head but the night, and I was ashamed, and the shame was worse than the fear. Beside me, an old corporal of horse named Tallies, a man who had soldiered before any of us were born, sat with his cap in his hands and his lips moving, and after a while I realized he was not praying. He was counting too. And when a great one came down, so close the dust sifted from the cellar roof, and the lantern swung, Tallies stopped counting and lifted his head and said to no one, "He's still there." "You can't know that," I said. "I can know it," said Tallies. "He said he'd keep the post, so he's keeping it. That's the whole of the thing, lad. There's no more to know than that." I did not believe him. I thought no man could stand in the open under those guns and keep standing. I thought the next great shell would take the gate and the box and the man together, and that we would come up at dawn to find only a crater where the king's house had kept its watch for 600 years. I thought all the dark things a frightened man thinks. And above us, alone in the burning dark, with the city ringing its own bells in terror, Edrin Vance stood his post, and the long night had only begun. I could not bear the cellar. I will not dress it up as courage, it was the opposite. The not knowing was a worse thing to sit with than the shells, and somewhere near the second hour I told Tallies I was going to the slit window in the north wall of the undercroft, the one that gave a narrow view across the court to the gate, and he caught my sleeve and said, "Sit, lad. There's nothing your eyes can do for him." But I went. I had to see whether the man was still standing, because as long as he was standing I felt that the rest of us were still, somehow, soldiers, and if he fell I did not know what we would be. The slit window was the width of 2 fingers, and it framed the gate like a picture in a narrow case. And there he was. The river behind him was a sheet of moving orange now, the timber wharves had caught, and against that light Edrin Vance was a black shape as upright as the gate post beside him, the line of the bearskin, the line of the shoulders, the rifle held just so. I watched him a long time. He did not pace. He did not crouch when the shells fell. Once a blast somewhere near the customs house threw a sheet of light across the court, so bright I saw the brass of his buttons catch it, and I saw his face for half a heartbeat, and it was not the face of a man enduring. It was the face of a man at his work, calm, attentive, looking down the dark road for whatever might come up it, exactly as he would on a quiet summer evening. That half heartbeat undid something in me. I have thought about it 10,000 times since. A frightened man can make himself stand still. Only a man who has decided something can look like that. I was not the only one watching. The undercroft of the king's house is not only for the household. That night it had filled with whoever had been near the gate when the guns opened. A baker who had been delivering to the kitchens, 2 old women from the almshouse on the corner, a clerk of the treasury caught working late, a doctor with his bag, a boy of perhaps 10 who had been running a message and now sat white-faced against the wall with his knees up like mine. And one by one, as the night wore on, they drifted to the slit window the way moths come to a candle, and they looked through it, and they saw the same thing I saw, and I watched it change them. The baker looked and stepped back and said quietly, "He's not going to leave, is he?" "No," I said. "He's not." "Then I'm a fool to be down here," the baker said, not angry, just turning it over. He did not go up. He had no post to keep, and only a fool throws his life away for nothing. But he stood straighter after that, and when one of the old women began to weep, he went and sat by her and held her hand and said, "There now, there's a king's man at the gate." The gate's held, as if that settled the whole war, and the strange thing is that it comforted her, and it comforted me, and I do not think any of us could have told you exactly why. That is the thing I am trying to make you understand. There was nothing Edrin Vance could do against the guns. One man with a ceremonial rifle cannot shoot down a shell. He could not stop a single round from falling, could not save one house, could not put out one fire. By every measure of use, he was the most useless man in Carthage that night, and by some other measure that I had no name for then and have only half a name for now, he was the most important. Because a city under bombardment is not only being broken by the shells, it is being broken by the fear, which spreads faster than fire and does more harm. And the one thing the enemy could not do, with all their guns, was make Edrin Vance flinch. As long as that was true, some part of the city's heart could not be made to flinch either. The shelling lifted a little near the middle of the night, a long lull that was almost worse than the firing, because in it you waited, and in the lull the doctor went up the cellar stair to see if he was needed above, and came back down after a while and sat by me, and was quiet for a time before he spoke. "I went out to him," the doctor said. "Thought the man might be hurt or frozen past sense. There's glass and stone all over the court. A near one took the windows out of the gatehouse. I picked my way over to him and asked him plainly, was he wounded, was he able, would he not come in just while it's quiet and take some water? And I said, and he answered me without turning his head," said the doctor. "He said, 'I'm not hurt, sir. Thank you for coming out, but I have the post.' I told him no one would know if he stepped into the gatehouse for a moment that I'd not breathe a word. And do you know what he said to me?" The doctor's voice had gone unsteady. "He said, 'I would know, that's all. I would know.' And then he asked me with my bag who'd come to help him, he asked me very kindly to get back under cover because the lull would not last, and he did not want me caught in the open on his account. I have met brave men. The guard is full of them. Bravery is not rare. But there is a kind of steadiness that goes past bravery into something quieter and harder, and I had never been so near it as I was that night, looking through a slit in a stone wall at a man who would not come in out of the fire because he would know. I knew a little of Edrin Vance by then, the way you know a man you stand a watch with, which is to say I knew his step and his silences and not much of his heart. He was not a talker. He came from a fishing town down the coast where, he had told me once, the men go out in weather that kills them every winter and go out again the next, because the alternative is that nobody eats, and he had said it without any drama, as a plain fact about the place that had made him. He had no wife, no children. His mother was dead and his father was a name he did not use. The guard was the whole of his family and the post was the whole of his work, and I had thought before that night that this made him a small man, a man with a small life. I never thought it again. I came to see that the night found him exactly because he had nothing else, that a man who has made the keeping of his word the whole of who he is cannot set it down without setting down himself, and so will not, cannot, even under guns. What looked like a small life was a life with nothing soft left in it to give way. I told some of this to Tallies in a low voice at the window because I had to say it to someone. The old corporal of horse listened and nodded, and then he told me a thing I have never forgotten. "There was a sentry," he said, "in my grandfather's time at the old border keep, who stood his post through a flood when the river came up in the night and the rest of the garrison took to the towers. They found him at first light, dead, still standing, the water gone down, his musket at the present. And do you know what the people of that valley did? They never let the post go empty again, not for 100 years in his memory. One man's keeping of his word made 100 years of it in other men." Tallies looked through the slit at Edrin Vance, black against the burning river. "That's what's happening out there tonight, lad. He doesn't know it. They never do. But there'll be men keeping faith 50 years from now who keep it because of what that boy is doing at the gate right now and never know his name. That's how it travels. That's the only way it ever travels. The lull broke. The guns opened again, and this time they walked their fire up the king's road toward the great gate itself, a near one, a nearer one, and I gripped the cold stone of the window ledge until my fingers ached, and through the 2-finger gap I watched a shell come down in the very forecourt, perhaps 30 feet from the box, and the whole window went white. The blast threw me backward off the ledge. I struck the floor and lay there with the world ringing, dust raining down, the lanterns swinging crazily so that everyone's shadow leapt up the walls and fell down them. For a moment I could hear nothing at all. The old women were screaming and I could not hear them. The boy was clutching at me and I could not hear him. I could only see his mouth working. I dragged myself back to the window with my ears full of bells, certain that this time the gate was gone and the man with it. I could not see for the dust. The court was a churning gray cloud lit orange from within, and stones were still falling, and I pressed my eye to the gap and saw nothing, a wall of smoke, and I said his name out loud into the cellar though no one could hear me. I said Vance, Vance, like a prayer to a dead man. And then the smoke thinned, the way smoke does, drawn off by the river wind, and out of it the gate came back bent. One great leaf of the iron sprung half off its lower hinge and hanging, the gatehouse roof stove in, the cobbles of the forecourt thrown up in a ragged crater not 30 feet from the sentry box. And in the box, Edrin Vance was standing. He was down on one knee. I saw that, and my heart stopped. Then I saw that he was not falling, he was rising, pushing himself up off the splintered floor of the box with one white-gloved hand, and getting his feet under him, and standing, and bringing the rifle back up to the present, and squaring his shoulders to the bent and ruined gate as if presenting arms to it, as if to say, "You are wrecked, but you are still the king's gate and I am still its sentry." He had been knocked flat by a near miss that would have sent any reasonable man scrambling for the cellar on his hands and knees, and he had got up, and dressed himself, and gone back to his work. There was blood on the side of his face from the flying glass. I could see it black against the firelight, and he did not raise a glove to it. He stood. Behind me in the cellar the doctor had reached the window over my shoulder, and he saw it too, and I heard him let out a breath I think he had been holding for an hour. "He's up," the doctor said, his voice cracking. "By every law of God and medicine, he's up." And he said it loud, and it went round the cellar in the dark, hand to hand like bread. "He's up. The sentry's up. The gate's held, and I will tell you what happened then, and you may believe it or not, but I was there." The old woman who had been weeping stopped weeping. The clerk of the treasury, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, lifted his head. The baker stood up, and the boy of perhaps 10, who had been white and silent against the wall for 3 hours of hell, the boy got up and came and tugged at my sleeve and said, in a small clear voice that cut straight through the ringing in my ears, "Is it the same man? Is it still the same man at the gate?" "It's the same man," I told him. "He didn't run," the boy said. "It was not a question. He said it the way you say a thing you have decided to keep. He didn't run the whole time. I'm not going to either." And he sat back down against the wall, but he sat differently. He sat the way Tally sat, the way the baker stood, the way I was beginning, God help me, to want to stand. Straight. As if there were a gate in each of us and a man at it, and the man would not run. I understood, kneeling at that window with my ears bleeding noise, something that the rest of my life has only confirmed. Courage is not a thing one man has and another lacks, locked up in him like the color of his eyes. Courage is caught, the way fear is caught. It passes from a steady man to a frightened one across a dark room, across a 40-foot court, across a city. One man cannot make a whole city brave by an act of will. But one man, by simply refusing to be afraid in a place where everyone can see him, can give the city back the brave that fear had stolen. That is what Edrin Vance was doing at the gate. He did not know he was doing it. He thought he was only keeping his post. He was keeping all of us. Word of it had already begun to travel, though I did not learn how far until afterward. The telephone exchange in the basement of the General Post Office had stayed manned all night by a handful of operators who would not abandon the lines, and one of them, a woman named Hessel, I learned her name later, when they gave her a ribbon for it, had taken a call near midnight from a warden at the river wall asking after the king's house, and had said, almost without thinking, "The house stands. There's still a guard at the king's gate. I can see his lantern from the window." And the warden had told the men at the river wall, who were near to breaking, that the king's gate was still kept, and they had not broken. And Hessel, finding that it steadied men to hear it, began to say it to every warden and fire captain and aide post who called through that long night, as a kind of watchword. "The gate is held. The sentry stands." It ran through the dark city, on the telephone wires, faster than the shells could fall. In cellars across Carthage, in the deep stations where the people sheltered, in the aid posts and the fire brigade yards, men and women who had never seen Edrin Vance and never would heard the same handful of words passed mouth to mouth. "The king's gate is held. The sentry's still standing," and took heart from it, the way you take heart from a light you can see across water, not because the light can save you, but because it proves that someone somewhere is still keeping faith with the morning. I did not see those distant places that night, of course. I was in a cellar with my ears bleeding. But in the years after, when the city set down what it remembered, the same threads kept turning up, and I gathered them the way you gather the scattered pieces of a thing you were too close to see whole. There was a fire captain at the timber wharves whose men were ready to fall back and let the riverside burn, until word came down the wire that the king's gate still stood. And he held them, and they saved 3 streets that would otherwise have gone, and he said afterward he did not know to this day why those particular words had stiffened his spine, only that they had. There was an aid post in the crypt of a church near the cathedral where the wounded were brought, and a young surgeon there, near the end of her strength, who told me long after that when she heard the watchword passed among the stretcher-bearers, "The sentry stands," she had thought, very simply, "Then so will I," and had gone back to her table and worked till the morning. There was a signalman at the river telegraph who would not leave his key. There was a lock-keeper who stayed at his lock. None of them had any more reason to stay than fear gave them reason to run, and all of them, when you pressed them, came back to the same small handful of words that had crossed the city in the dark. "The king's gate is held," words about one man standing in one place, that somehow gave 1,000 other people leave to stand in theirs. That is the strange arithmetic of it, and I have never fully solved it. One sentry could not save the city, but the example of one sentry, multiplied through a frightened people, very nearly did. The shells broke stone, and the stone could be rebuilt. What the enemy truly wanted to break that night was the thing that holds a city together when the stone is falling, the shared, unspoken agreement that we will not each of us bolt and save ourselves and let the rest go down. And against that, against the contagion of one man's steadiness, all their guns were useless. They could knock down the gate. They could not knock down the keeping of it. There came a point in the deepest part of the night when a senior officer of the household tried to bring him in, and I think you should hear how that went, because it is the part men get wrong when they tell the story now. They tell it as though the guard ordered Vance to stay, as though he were a soldier made to suffer. The truth is the opposite. The truth is that the guard tried to save him, and could not. The man who came was the captain of the watch, Captain Marrow, who had been with the king in the deep undercroft and came up at the worst of it because he could not bear to leave one of his men in the open. I saw him cross the court, a tall, gray, unhurried man, moving through the falling glass without flinching, which is its own kind of telling. He went to the box and stood beside Vance, and they spoke, and though I could not hear the words through the wall and the ringing, I learned them afterward from Vance himself and from Marrow, and they agreed in every particular. "Trooper Vance," the captain said, "I'm going to relieve you, not for any failing, you've done more tonight than the post asked. I'll stand the gate myself, or I'll close it formally and leave it unmanned with my own authority, which is mine to do. You've earned the cellar. come in." And Edrin Vance said, "Sir, with respect, if you stand it, then a man is still in the open, and it's only that the man is you, who has more worth to the house than I do. And if you close it and leave it unmanned, then for the first time in 600 years the king's gate goes dark while the king is inside it and his city is being burned. I don't think either of those is the thing you came up here to do, sir. I think you came up to save me, and I thank you for it more than I can say. But the way to save me is to let me do the one thing I'm good for tonight, which is to stand here so the people in that cellar and the people across the river can say the gate is held. That's worth a trooper, sir. It's worth more than a trooper. Let me keep it." There was a silence then, the captain told me later, in which a great shell came down somewhere toward the cathedral and neither of them so much as turned toward it. And then Captain Marrow, a man who had broken harder men than me for a loose chinstrap, took off his cap to a trooper, there in the burning court, and put it back on and said, "Keep your post, Trooper Vance," and walked back across the glass to the cellar and came down the stair, and I saw his face as he came, and it was wet. He did not order us up. He had more sense and more mercy than that, but he stood at the foot of the stair and he said to all of us in the dark, "There is a man at the gate who will not be moved. I have just offered to relieve him and he has refused me, and he was right to. I'll not pretend to you that I understand it all the way down, but I'll tell you what I do understand. A house is not stone. A crown is not gold. They're agreements that some things will be kept no matter what comes. And every one of those agreements lives or dies on whether, when the test finally comes, one ordinary man will keep his word with nobody making him. Tonight that man is up there at the gate, keeping all our words for us. The least we can do is be worthy of him." And he sat down on the bottom step, our captain, and waited out the night with the baker and the boy and the old women, one of us. After that something was different in the cellar. I cannot say we were not afraid. We were afraid until dawn, but the fear had stopped being the master of the room. It had a rival now, and the rival was a black upright shape at a bent iron gate, and every time a great shell came down and the dust sifted from the roof, someone, the boy, more often than not would say into the dark, "He's still there," and someone else would answer, "He's still there," and it became a thing we said to each other to keep our courage lit, the way Hessel was saying it on the telephone wires, the way the whole city was beginning to say it without knowing where the words had come from. The boy would not leave the slit window after that. He had a name. I learned Tomas, and he was a runner, one of the lads the wardens used to carry messages when the wires went down, and he had been caught between posts when the guns opened and had taken shelter with us by chance. He stood on an upturned crate to reach the gap, and he watched Edrin Vance for the rest of the night the way I imagine I had watched my own father at some work I did not understand but knew to be important. Once he turned to me, his face lit faintly by the fires through the slit, and asked me a question I have never been able to forget. "Is he scared?" Tomas said. "Out there, is he scared, do you think?" I started to tell him no, the easy thing, the thing you tell a frightened child, and then I stopped because I owed the boy the truth and because I had begun to understand the truth myself. "I think he must be," I said. "I think any man would be. I think he's as scared as you and I are, Tomas. That's not the thing that makes him different." "Then what's the thing?" the boy said. "The thing," I said slowly, working it out as I said it, "is that he decided a long time ago that being scared wasn't going to be allowed to make his choices for him. So now it can't. It can shout at him all night, but it doesn't get a vote." The boy thought about that, his small face very serious, and then he nodded once as if I had handed him a tool he meant to keep, and turned back to the window. I do not know what became of Tomas. The war took a great many people and gave back fewer. But I have always hoped that somewhere, some night when his own long night came, that boy remembered what he saw through a 2-finger gap in a cellar wall, and stood. Tallies beside us had heard the whole of it. The old corporal of horse said nothing for a while. Then he put his hand on the boy's shoulder lightly and said, "Your trooper Aldous has it right, son. Courage isn't not being afraid. That's a thing they tell you in songs, and the songs are wrong. Courage is being afraid clean through and keeping your feet anyway. Any fool can be brave when there's nothing to fear. The man at the gate is the other kind, the only kind that counts. Toward the end the firing slackened. The enemy guns had a range of so many hours and no more before they must be limbered and drawn back. That is a thing about guns the people in the cellar did not know, but Tallies did, and as the gaps between the shells grew longer he began to count them out loud, almost cheerfully, like a man counting a fever down. That's a long one. Longer. They're tiring, the devils. They've a road to march before light, same as any soldier. And the gray came at last to the slit window, not sunrise. There was too much smoke for sunrise, but a thinning, a paling, the particular ash-colored light of a morning after fire. I went back to the window for the last time as the light came up, and I will carry what I saw there to my grave, and be glad of it. The forecourt was a ruin. The fine gravel was gone, churned into craters and heaped stone. The gatehouse stood roofless, its windows blown to teeth of glass. One leaf of the great iron gate hung crooked, and the wall above it was pocked and scorched. Smoke lay over the river in a long gray bar, and somewhere a fire still burned itself out, and the bells had stopped at last, all of them, so that the morning was very quiet, the way the world is quiet when it has finished doing its worst and is ashamed. And in the middle of all that wreckage, at the slope of the broken gate, stood Edrin Vance. He was filthy with dust and dried blood, his bare skin gray instead of black, his red tunic the color of the ash that lay over everything, his white gloves no longer white. But his rifle was at the present, his back was straight, his chin was up, his boots were together. He had stood the whole night through, alone in the open, under guns that had broken a city. And he was standing now exactly as the book says a sentry should stand at the changing of a peaceful watch, ready to be relieved, with his post kept and his honor clean, and not one thing about him given over to the night that had tried so hard to take it. The shelling had ended near an hour past. He had not known it would end. For all he knew, when the last shell fell, there would be 1,000 more. He had simply stood until it was over, because that was the post, and the post was held until he was relieved. The relief came up the broken stair as the light strengthened, a full file of the watch, with Captain Marrow at their head, all of us behind, the whole household coming up out of the deep ground into the ash-gray morning to see with our own eyes the thing we had only heard through a wall. We formed up across the wrecked court, and we marched to the gate over the broken stone as steadily as that ground allowed, and the new sentry took his place at the slope, and Captain Marrow himself gave the order to relieve the post. And Edrin Vance came to attention, and shouldered his rifle, and stepped down out of the box and was relieved, 12 hours after he had taken it. He swayed once when his boots came onto the broken cobbles, and I started forward to catch him, but he caught himself, the way he had caught himself in the night, and would not be carried. He walked off his post on his own 2 feet. That mattered to him. I understood that it mattered, and I let him. But here is the thing I did not expect, the thing that tells you what that night had done. The people had come up too. Out of the undercroft, out of the deep stations, out of the cellars all down the King's Road, the people of Carthing came up into the smoke to look at their city, and they came, somehow, to the gate. The word had run all night on the wires, the gate is held, the sentry stands, and now in the gray morning they came to see whether it was true, the baker and the old women and the clerk and the doctor first, and then strangers, more and more of them, drawn up the ruined road to the one place in the burned city where something had not fallen. They filled the broken court. And when Edrin Vance, dusk-gray, blood-marked, swaying with 12 hours of standing, walked down off his post, that silent crowd who had been bombarded all night and lost God knows what, took off their hats to him. Not a cheer. It was too solemn a morning for cheering. They simply, all of them, bared their heads the way you do at a thing that is holy, and they let him pass through them, and I heard one old man say to the boy beside him, "Remember this. You tell your grandchildren you saw the man who stood at the gate." He did not become a colonel. He did not want to. There was a ribbon in time, they could not very well not give him one, and a line in the order of the day that said only that Trooper E. Vance had kept his post throughout the bombardment of the night, which is the highest thing the guard knows how to say and means everything to a man who understands it. The story outran the ribbon, the way stories do. Within a week the children of Carthage were playing it in the rubble, one of them the sentry who would not run while the others threw stones for shells, and the sentry must stand and not flinch, and that was the whole of the game, and it was the best game any of them had ever played. Within a month the river wall had a name for the part of the line that had not broken that night. They called it the gate, in his honor, the men who'd held it. Within a year, when the war was over and Carthage began to build itself back, the masons who repaired the king's gate left one stone of the wrecked old gatehouse standing, scorched as it was, and set it into the new work, and no plaque on it, because everyone already knew. I asked him once, years after, when we were both old men and the war was a thing in books, why he had done it, why he had not come into the cellar when the captain himself offered, when no one on earth would have blamed him. I expected some great answer, having thought about it half my life. He looked at me as if I had asked why water is wet. Because I said I would keep the post, said Edrin Vance, and there were people who needed it kept. Those are the only two reasons there ever are, Corwin. There's never been any others. And he turned his cup in his old hands and looked into it, and that was all he ever said about the longest night Carthage ever knew. I have told it as plainly as I can, because the plain truth is the only honor worthy of the man. He did not win a battle. He did not fire a shot. He stood still in one place while the world came apart and kept his word with nobody making him, and because he did, a frightened city remembered that it was not, after all, going to break. That is what a sentry is for, not the rifle, not the splendid coat. The rifle and the coat are only so that, when the long night comes, the people will know the man at the gate and look to him and find him standing. He is gone now, Edrin Vance, gone these many years, and they buried him with his medals and a great crowd and the whole guard turned out. But I do not go to the grave to remember him. I go to the king's gate, where the new stone holds the one scorched old stone in its arms, and I stand a moment, as straight as my old back will let me, and I keep him company at his post, the way he kept all of us that night the shells fell on Carthage and one man would not run.